The rise of the junta. Why military coups are taking over West Africa. Military trucks roll through streets packed with cheering people. Young men sit on top of armored vehicles, waving their country's flag, their faces lit up with a strange mix of joy and desperation. Soldiers, who are supposed to be in their barracks, are being hailed as heroes. A woman, her voice shaking with emotion, tells a reporter, "We are free." This is not what we're taught a military coup looks like. We're told a coup is the death of democracy, a violent power grab. But from Mali to Niger, from Burkina Faso to Guinea, a completely different story is playing out. A story where soldiers showing up isn't the end of freedom, but for some, the very beginning of it. Across West Africa, a coup belt has locked into place, stretching across the vast Sahel. But this isn't just a story about strong men wanting power. It's a story about a broken promise. The promise of democracy. It's about governments that failed their people, about economic pain so deep it kills all hope, and about an entire generation that has lost faith in a system they feel was never built for them. So, what happens when democracy doesn't deliver? What happens when people, left behind and fed up, start to see a savior in a soldier's uniform? Today, we're looking at the rise of the junta and asking the big question: why are people across West Africa welcoming soldiers as their redeemers, and what does this mean for the future of the continent? To really get what's happening, you have to look at a map. Since 2020, a wave of military takeovers has totally redrawn the political lines of this region. It started in Mali in August 2020, when Colonel Assimi Goïta took power during huge anti-government protests. Then, less than a year later, he did it again, cementing his rule in a second coup. The dominoes just kept falling. Guinea in September 2021, where an elite commander, Mamadi Doumbouya, kicked out an 83-year-old president who had twisted the constitution to get a third term. Then the contagion hit Burkina Faso. In January 2022, the military said the government couldn't handle a brutal jihadist insurgency and took over. Just 8 months later, another coup brought an even younger officer, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, to power, promising a tougher fight. And in July 2023, the world watched as Niger, a major Western partner in the fight against terror, fell to its own presidential guard. The trend even spread beyond the region, when Gabon's military in Central Africa followed suit a month later, proving just how infectious the idea had become. This string of coups has created what everyone now calls the coup belt, a solid block of nations under military rule, stretching from the Atlantic all the way into the heart of the Sahel. These aren't just random, one-off events. Analysts call it coup contagion. A successful takeover in one country makes it seem possible, even normal, in the next. Each coup makes the next one easier. The regional group, ECOWAS, tried to stop it. They hit the juntas with harsh sanctions, suspended their memberships, and even threatened to send in troops. But it all backfired. The sanctions, meant to punish the military leaders, ended up hurting ordinary people, causing food and medicine shortages. This made people angry, not at the juntas, but at the outside world. So, in a huge show of defiance, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger announced in early 2024 they were leaving ECOWAS altogether. Instead, they formed their own defense pact, the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. That move drew a clear line in the sand. On one side, the remaining democracies of West Africa. On the other, a unified, defiant bloc of military-led states. The question isn't about individual coups anymore. It's about a massive split in the continent's entire political and security structure. To understand how we got here, we have to look past the soldiers and into the societies that welcome them. We have to figure out the disease for which the coup is being sold as the cure. The core of this crisis is a single, hard truth. For millions of people in West Africa, Western-style democracy has failed to deliver on its most basic promises. Decades after democracy was supposed to have taken root in the 1990s, many see the system not as a government for the people, but as a machine for a small, corrupt elite to get rich. The first and most toxic failure is governance. In so many of the countries that have had coups, the state is seen as fundamentally corrupt. Political office isn't about public service, it's a golden ticket to personal wealth. It's what's known as the politics of the belly, where state resources are gobbled up by those in power and their friends, while basic services like hospitals, schools, and roads fall apart. Take Guinea. The coup leaders there said they had to step in because of crushing poverty and corruption. That message hit home with a population that saw their country's massive mineral wealth get shipped away with almost no benefit to them. In Mali, it was the same story. Years of terrible leadership had destroyed public trust. In fact, surveys taken after the 2020 coup showed that a huge majority of people supported the military takeover because they had completely lost faith in the corrupt civilian government. This corruption often goes hand in hand with cheating the democratic system itself. Leaders cling to power, changing constitutions to get rid of term limits, rigging elections, and shutting down anyone who opposes them. This creates a deep cynicism. If you're a young person with no job and no future, watching a president literally rewrite the law to stay in power isn't some abstract political issue. It's a personal insult. It's proof that the system isn't for you. When state institutions are this weak and unaccountable, they can't handle real crises. They become hollowed out, leaving a massive power vacuum. And who steps into that vacuum? The military, often seen as the only institution left that's disciplined, organized, and can actually get something done. The soldiers don't have to kick down the door to take power. They just have to walk through one that was left wide open. The second massive failure is security. For over a decade, a fire of violent extremism has been tearing through the Sahel. Groups tied to Al-Qaeda and ISIS have turned huge parts of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger into killing fields. They thrive on bad governance and economic misery, overwhelming national armies and terrorizing entire communities. Think about this. According to the 2025 Global Terrorism Index, the Sahel was responsible for over half of all terrorism-related deaths in the world in 2024. That's a staggering number that shows the human cost of this crisis. For years, civilian governments, often backed by partners like France and the US, tried and failed to stop it. Even with thousands of foreign troops on the ground, the violence only got worse. The number of people killed by jihadist attacks in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger has more than doubled since 2020. This total failure to provide the most basic duty of a state, protecting its people, is probably the biggest reason for the recent coups. In both Mali and Burkina Faso, the takeovers were explicitly justified by the government's terrible handling of the security crisis. Soldiers on the front lines felt like they'd been sent to die, fighting a brutal enemy without the right gear, support, or even a clear plan. They watched their friends get killed while politicians in the capital seemed clueless. This created a deep anger within the army, a feeling that only they could step in and save the country. And the people felt it too. When your village can be attacked at any moment, when your kids can't go to school because they might be kidnapped, and when the state is nowhere to be seen, the idea of democracy feels like a sick joke. In that context, a military junta that promises, first and foremost, to bring back order and security sounds incredibly appealing. People aren't necessarily against democracy in theory. They're against the failed version of it that left them terrified. They're willing to trade abstract freedoms for the concrete promise of just being safe. The tragedy, as we're now seeing, is that military rule often fails to deliver on that promise either, and civilian deaths keep climbing even after the juntas are in charge. The third piece of this crisis is the economy. Chronic poverty, insane levels of youth unemployment, and a total lack of opportunity are the backdrop for everything else. West Africa has some of the youngest populations in the world. Millions of ambitious young people are entering a job market with nothing for them. This demographic pressure cooker, mixed with economies that are going nowhere, is the perfect recipe for political unrest. When people can barely feed their families, their patience for corrupt politicians runs out fast. The ideals of constitutional order don't mean much when you're worried about your next meal. And global events have only thrown fuel on the fire. The fallout from COVID, sky-high food and fuel prices from the war in Ukraine, and the brutal effects of climate change, like desertification and fights over scarce resources, have just made everything worse. The juntas get this. Their speeches are perfectly designed to tap into this economic anger. They talk about sovereignty, not just in politics, but in economics. They promise to take back the nation's resources, to end shady deals with foreign companies, and to build an economy that serves their people, not outside interests. And that message is powerful. For generations, people in resource-rich countries like Niger, with its uranium, or Guinea, with its bauxite, have watched their wealth get dug up and shipped away while they stayed poor. The feeling, and often the reality, is that their democratic governments were in on the deal, signing contracts that benefited foreign powers and a tiny local elite. So when a military leader gets on TV and vows to end all that, He's speaking directly to one of the deepest wounds in post-colonial Africa. He's promising not just a new government, but a whole new system. The coup becomes a tool for economic freedom, a chance to finally control your own destiny. So, when you're facing a system you see as corrupt, dangerous, and hopeless, the military starts to look less like a threat and more like the only option. The coup leaders in West Africa aren't your old-school, cigar-chomping dictators. They're often young, charismatic, and know how to use social media. They present themselves as patriots here to clean up a mess. They are masters of political theater, spinning a story where their takeover isn't a coup. It's a revolution demanded by the people. Their language is always about national salvation. They don't talk about ruling. They talk about restoring dignity, securing the nation, and fixing the mistakes of the past. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré took power in Burkina Faso, he did it in army fatigues and a red beret, trying to look like a humble soldier patriot, just like the country's revolutionary hero, Thomas Sankara. His speeches, and those of the leaders in Mali and Niger, are all about promising to do what the old governments couldn't: crush the terrorists, get rid of corruption, and stand up to foreign powers. This message is a direct answer to all the failures we just talked about. To the corruption crisis, they promise to hold people accountable. To the security crisis, they promise to throw everything the nation has into the war. And to the economic crisis, they promise to take back control of their natural resources and break free from foreign exploitation. And critically, they frame their takeovers as the will of the people. They point to the cheering crowds as proof, saying they're just doing what everyone wanted. This creates a powerful feedback loop. Public anger leads to a coup, and the coup leaders use that public support to make their rule seem legitimate. But that first wave of support can be thin. The reality of governing is a lot harder than giving a revolutionary speech. While the juntas have been busy securing their own power and looking tough, their actual track record on making things safer or better for people is shaky at best. In Mali, 5 years after the first coup, huge parts of the country are still out of control, and you can feel public patience wearing thin as the military government cancels elections and cracks down on political life. The saviors in uniform are discovering that the deep-rooted problems that ruined the last guys, weak institutions, porous borders, and crushing poverty, don't just disappear. Seizing power can actually make things worse, leading to sanctions and isolation that make it even harder to deliver on any of their promises. This crisis in West Africa isn't happening in a bubble. It's playing out on a global chessboard, where old colonial ties are breaking and new world powers are fighting for influence. All the internal problems, the corruption, the violence, the poverty, are being used and amplified by outside players, turning a regional mess into a global power struggle. You can't understand how people in the Sahel feel without understanding the deep, and often bitter, legacy of French colonialism. For decades after independence, France kept a huge amount of political, economic, and military power over its former colonies in a system people call Francafrique. France had military bases, propped up friendly leaders, and even controlled the region's currency. For a lot of people, especially the youth, this whole relationship feels like a national humiliation. The French military, which first showed up in Mali in 2013 to fight jihadists, was welcomed at first. But after a decade of French operations where the security situation only got worse, that welcome turned into suspicion and anger. The feeling grew that France wasn't a partner, but a boss, more interested in protecting its own interests, like access to Niger's uranium, than in actually helping Africans solve their own problems. This anti-French feeling has become a powerful weapon for the new military juntas. They've tapped into decades of frustration and made kicking France out a central part of their platform. In Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, one by one, the juntas have torn up defense agreements and demanded that the French ambassador and troops get out, and huge crowds have cheered them on. This isn't just a policy change, it's a deep psychological break. It's a declaration of real sovereignty. The military leaders have successfully cast themselves as the heroes of a second independence. As France and the West have been pushed out, another power has been happy to step in: Russia. Moscow is quickly becoming the go-to security partner for the juntas. It offers a simple, transactional deal with no strings attached, which sounds great to regimes that are sick of being lectured by the West about democracy and human rights. Russia's playbook is brutally effective. It uses its state-controlled military machine, including the new Africa Corps, the successor to the infamous Wagner Group, to give the juntas what they need most: weapons, training, and tough mercenaries to protect them and fight insurgents. Intelligence shows Russia has been sending heavy weapons like tanks and artillery to West Africa, getting around Western sanctions. In return for security, Russia gets exactly what it wants. It gets its hands on key resources like gold, it secures a military foothold in a critical part of the world, and it scores a huge diplomatic win by kicking out its Western rivals. For Russia, West Africa is a new front in its global fight with the West, a way to show it still has global influence and can't be isolated. For the juntas in the Sahel, Russia is the perfect partner. It provides the military power they need to stay in charge without any of the political demands from the West. The Kremlin doesn't care about election schedules or human rights. This practical, results-only approach is sold as a partnership of equals, a stark contrast to the old, paternalistic relationship with France. Waving a Russian flag at a pro-coup rally has become a powerful symbol. It's a rejection of the old colonial master and an embrace of a new, powerful ally. This strategic shift is changing everything, creating new alliances and making an already volatile region even more tense. The situation we've talked about today, failing governments, spreading violence, and global power games, is incredibly complex and changing every day. To really understand it, you have to look past the headlines. If you find this kind of deep dive analysis helpful and want to support our work, please hit subscribe and ring that notification bell. We also really want to hear from you. What do you think is the main driver of this crisis? Is there any way back to democracy, or are we seeing a whole new kind of government being born? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The rise of the juntas in West Africa isn't a simple power grab. It's a symptom of a much deeper sickness. It's the story of a democratic experiment that, for many of its own people, has completely and utterly failed. It failed to keep them safe, it failed to give them economic hope, and it failed to give them a government that was anything but corrupt. The soldiers who took power didn't create these problems, they just took advantage of them. They masterfully tapped into a deep well of real public anger and a desire for sovereignty to sell themselves as the nation's saviors. The crowds cheering in the streets of Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey aren't celebrating the end of democracy as an idea. They're celebrating the end of their democracy, a specific, broken system that they felt had left them behind. They're putting their hope in new leaders who promise order, safety, and national pride. But it's a huge gamble. While the juntas have been good at cutting old colonial ties and making new friends, they now have to actually solve the massive problems they inherited. The initial high of the takeover is already fading, replaced by the grim reality of governing. Security is still a huge problem, economies are on the brink, and nobody knows what the path back to any kind of stable government looks like. The men in uniform who promised to be the solution are now in danger of becoming just another part of the problem, trapping their countries in a cycle of instability. This leaves West Africa and the world with a huge and uncomfortable question. As this coup belt gets stronger and the global power struggle heats up, are we watching the painful birth of a new, more independent political order? Or is the region just sliding deeper into an age of strong men and conflict, where the dream of a stable and democratic future is further away than ever? The answer will decide the fate of millions and will shape the African continent for years to come.